Hi, everybody. I'm Scott, and thanks for joining me today for another episode of the Companion Podcast in support of the film Skin on Skin, The Rise and Fall of the World's Largest Furrier, Part 2. Today, I'm just in one of those moods where I couldn't get it together, I couldn't find a theme, and I was just listening and jamming to some music by a famous band, and I heard the words musing circumstances, and that's what I've got today is this mishmash of musings, of circumstances. And I'll tell you what, if you know what that lyric is from, what band and what song, please put it in the comments below and share it with everybody and show us that you know your rock and roll history. So anyways, no theme today, a bunch of different, as I said, musings and circumstances, which I've put into two different categories. People's comments about the business, the Evans Fur business, and people's comments about other people. So let me start, though, as always, before we get going, and show you the film that we're in the process of producing at this moment, the second film of the docuseries, Skin on Skin, The Rise and Fall of the World's Largest Furrier.
I'm Michael Idless, and this is Skin on Skin, The Rise and Fall of the World's Largest Furrier, Part 2. So let's review. We have Rose Walcove being sold to Julius Meltzer when still a spinster at age 29. They're coming to America first class, on the backs of her wealthy Trans-Siberian Railroad engineer brothers. Rose's depression sending her reeling and eventually to bed, to stay. Julius can't support the family, so oldest sons A.L. and Herman leave school to go to work. Oldest daughter Thelma is sent to finishing school to learn to care for them all. Brother Herman assists Brother A.L. and his wife Minerva in the startup of Evans Furs, only for Herman to go into a slow, lifelong depression, clearly a result of the lack of parenting from Rose and Julius. Brother-in-law Harold Sussman and his wife, oldest daughter Thelma, are sent to Boston to expand the company east. Thelma never forgives her brothers for the move away from the family. And let's not forget A.L.'s son David. Oh, David, the crown prince who would wear the crown alone in his own personal cocoon that he himself created. Loved by those who worked for him, admonished by family for his selfish and narcissistic ways. Along the way, a fur company empire is built, and the Meltzers thrive while at the same time suffering the consequences of their parents' abandonment as tragedy checks in for an extended stay. As we recounted, from the moment they began selling squirrel scarves in 1929, Evans Furs seldom knew from tough times. What A.L. Meltzer had hit upon was growing, and the business kept moving forward. Which leads us to part 2, and the term, when you get to the top of the highest peak, there's only one direction you can go.
Ken Levy now tells us what life was like down on the third floor in the heart of the jungle after he got out of the Evans Fur training program.
Ken Geller said to me one day, Levy, you're just a flash in the pan. And I never spoke to him again. In 2 years, I never spoke to him again. So, Levy, you're just a flash in the pan. Yes, I do remember that. Saw Mark so invited me to his house with the Felbers, though, a number of times. Remember
Milton Felber, yep.
Yes. One of the worst people in the entire world. But his son was so nice. It's like, oh my God, Milton Felber. They say the good die young. I thought he was going to live till 150. Yes. But Sam Fields tried to fix me up. I don't know if it was his daughter or his niece. Yeah, but that didn't work out, obviously.
Oh, Sam Fields was blind.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, but he was a nice fellow, Sam Fields. Sam Fields, in the meeting one Saturday, he said, we were having a sale, of course, as we did every week. And there was a loss leader that everybody was selling. And I could see him now. We know who you are, the ones who are selling that coach. Sam Fields. Yeah.
We had a meeting on the 13th floor with the buyers. And Jim was making his presentation and all that stuff. And I said to him, no, Jim, I said, the beavers you're buying, underneath the arms, the skins are weak. And we're having a lot of complaints about it. And they're terry. He got so mad at me. He punched me after the meeting. He punched me and he threw me against the wall. And to this day, he still remembers, because I'm still friends with Jimmy. He said, don't ever embarrass me like that again. So, okay, I was to tell you. Well, he remembers. He brings it up to me sometimes. Oh, yeah, he brings it up to me. I still talk to Jimmy, I went flying across the room, I said something about the damn beaver coats. The skins were weak.
I always find Kenny's comments so amusing, as you will come to love also throughout this season. But another Ken Morgenstern, reminds us that a lot of what we learned at Evans comes in handy all the time. And his father, who also worked for Evans, Phil Morgan, reminded him of such.
But the service, and that goes back to what we were saying about Evans and about our father. My father always harped on the service end of things. And little did I know how right he was, because even in good years, that's what kept you in business, let alone years you're not selling as much retail product. Your service end provides for the customer and it provides for the store in revenue. I don't feel that he felt that he was all in 100% all the time. Even when in my younger years, it was a lot more custom made, but we presented the fine mink code and showed the difference of two same style, same description codes next to each other, that you were treating it like it was a piece of jewelry or a diamond, grading each skin and telling them that this one is better than that one. It was a whole process we went through, and the person cared. They were buying an investment to them.
My father was in the fur business. His whole family was in the fur business. His family was from Lithuania, and from what I gather, there were a lot of furriers coming out of that section of the world. He served in the Second World War, and then afterwards immigrated to South Africa, where he opened up a full salon. So he custom made everything from the raw skin up. So he had a factory and everything else producing. He had 15 staff running for him. So it was it was an okay business. You say South Africa furs, well, that's kind of strange because it doesn't get cold there. But people who travel, anywhere you travel, you're traveling to the northern hemisphere, which is always cold. So you need a fur, even to go to Florida, you would need a fur.
No,
So
same as we had in California or Texas or
correct. Yeah. I mean, California, Arizona, all of those places, fur was big, because you travel and it's cold, and that was the ideal garment to keep you warm and fashionable. So just about everyone had some sort of fur back in the day. And him and his sister were in competition with each other. So my father was Jewish and married a non-Jew, so he was exiled. And because he was exiled, his competition was his sister. And they never spoke, but they were both Fletchers and they both had Furriers in Cape Town. And then in 1981, I finished high school and it was time to do 2-year military service. And back in my day, it
I'm
was
out here.
guerrilla warfare. $1,000 a month danger pay to go sit in the bush and shoot them or they shoot you. We all know what the cause was for. And I said, this isn't for me. So the day I was due for military service was the day I left South Africa and never returned. Because if I did return, they would imprison me, then make me do military service. I'm sure by now I'm hoping the law is different and, one day I can return safely, but at this point I cannot.
Evans was the king. That everybody knew when they went to Evans, they get good value. They'd have a good coat department and dress department, sportswear. I mean, we were like, and our stores were nice looking, and we stood behind everything that we sold. And I think that meant a lot for people throughout the years. They're in business for a long time. They have good merchandise. We had good salespeople. Our service department was one of the best. I think our service was good. And our storage and cleaning was also very good. We had a lot of good people working for us. I remember when I was working for my father, the guy from National Superior, Lester Shapiro, they were supposed to do free work. My father had them out more than 10 times in a year. I want to show you what your people are doing. So that people knew when you came in to pick up your coat, 90% of the time or 99% of the time, everything was going to be fixed and it was going to be done right the first time. It was all part of the how they trained us to make sure we had good customer service.
That was Jim Lietz also on the service training, the customer service training that everybody at the Evans Fur Company was given. Bob LaBelle, who many of us worked for, including myself, recounts the hard work that you put in as the company moved you around the country in the various lease departments.
Well, let me tell you, the year that I moved down to Chicago, basically was the snow inches in Montreal was 113, Chicago was 22. So, I did move south to Chicago. Anyway, so I got there and pretty much live in Lake Point Tower over there for about a year and a half or so. And then they say, "Would you want to take over Austin store in Milwaukee?" And I said, "Yeah, that's fine." And then they moved me and everything. And what I did over there was I said, something is missing. First of all, the first salon in a lot of places are not very visible and so on and so forth. And we have some new fun furs at that time. So I made an arrangement with the management of the Boston store and decided to get a part or a piece of their coat department to put some fun furs, whatever is rabbit coat and something inexpensive. and they were locked up and everything else. And that was pretty good. Wind up doing pretty good business. And it was not my staff; it was their staff. But I paid them a little extra, and it really worked very, very well. Anyway, after that, maybe a couple of years after that, they said, "Well, we'd like you to go to Reich's in Dayton, Ohio. It's a little bit high, a little more updated, and So I said, "Okay, let's do it." I went there, went to Reich's, really had a ball, had great business, and I worked really close with Ralph Romberg and Walter Warren.
I think just sort of fashion taste, seeing what people like to wear. We're looking at something and thinking whether it's going to sell, whether it's the right thing, how to produce it, where to produce it. That was a big help. We manufactured all over the world. So for me, if I had something I wanted to get it done or get manufactured, I knew how, I already had to do business in China and Hong Kong. I already knew how to do it. People say, "How do you know these people? What do you do?" I said, "I know how to do this. This is I'd been dealing with Gibson Lau and all these people. Make this, do that, no changes. Sleep." Even people you didn't speak the same language. In your business, you spoke enough of the language. Like my contractors here in New York were mostly Polish. I don't speak any Polish whatsoever. But in the business, you learn how to say, put the shoulder pad. So I could communicate with my vendors, or I knew how to communicate with my vendors and manufacturers to get done what I needed to get done. Yes, we did the same. We got some new samples in today. Make the corrections to email. They do this, blah, 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 blah. So that I think what I learned a lot. And a lesson I learned is to use your taste. That's what Freddie Golden said. Go with your taste. Do you think that's the right thing? Go with your taste. That is how to lead. Don't second guess. If you think that's right, you gotta go with it. I became the largest shearling manufacturer in the States.
Okay, so I was not a college graduate at the time, and Evans' training program required that you had at least a bachelor's degree or an associate's degree, and I did not have one. So I first started in what they called phone sales, and that was to solicit first storage and cleaning. I did that for about 4 months, and I thought that I was doing a splendid job, and got called into Ted Geller's office, who headed up the service for Evans at the time. And I thought I was getting accolades, and it ended up that they had a program, it was called Soft-O-Pelt Preservation Process, where you got a 50-cent bonus if you sold that service to the customers if they were doing cleaning. It was an add-on. And basically, I was selling it women that had cloth coats. So I needed 50 cents. But I got recognized because of it. And, when I explained what I was doing, they basically gave me a bit of a lift, and they sent me to Woodfield, one of our suburban locations, to become a vault boy.
I always get a kick out of that story. Larry talking about how he was cha-ching, 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 just racking up in his mind the commissions he was getting, selling that Soft-O-Pelt process, only to have it all slip away, just like money in Vegas almost. And from there, speaking of customers, here's my cousin Michael Miller on the summer that he worked at Evans Furs, recounting summer sales customers.
It's in the blood to a degree. It irked me that in the middle of June, a couple who had absolutely no wherewithal to buy a fur coat were coming in and trying on, killing an hour and say, hey, let's go try on fur coats. And they'd come in and I learned, and I was doing the spiel on here's a mink and here's a beaver, and go through all the different coats and the complexities and the quality, etc. And an hour later, 20 coats later, they're walking out the door, and that's it. So that kind of drove me nuts.
It's quite an amazing process. So, but after 100 days, you had had enough, huh?
After 100 days, I realized I was probably not going into soft goods. And I'll never forget, I came out of college and got a position working in real estate workout for failed savings and loans. And I was making more than Helene had been making. Day one, I'm making more than Helene was making after 5 years. And she got very upset by that. And I said, hey, it's the industry. You're in an industry that traditionally doesn't pay very well. I'm in an industry that does pay to a greater degree.
The other story I had for you was, I'm watching the Super Bowl. I can't remember the year. And you know how it's on all day long. I'm sitting there watching the pregame stuff. And do you remember those two mink jackets that we had done for Dallas? They had the silver star with the blue mink. Oh, these two cute little ladies are standing there, and there's a arm, and they're going, and next morning, I get in at 8:00 in the morning. I call up Ron Kravitz. I'm like, did you watch the Super Bowl? And he goes, yeah. I said, did you see those mink coats? He said, yeah. I said, those were reported stolen 18 months ago. And he's like, no. And I'm like, oh yeah, start asking. So it turns out, and the person never got fired, but the store they were transferred to in Texas, it was his, I'll say, irrigation lawn guy's wife and sister were wearing it.
Wow.
Because the TV had to have their names so they could, all right, so they were able to backtrack. And they called them up and they said, where'd you get the coats from? Oh, my husband got them from this guy. They never prosecuted.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that are just not buying at that point in time. People that would come in before and just drop $10,000 on a fully let out mink coat, and they were crying about $4,000, and they just didn't want to pay the amounts. And you started to see the fall of fashion fur down there, and a lot more conservative type jackets and that kind of thing. Things that people could wear on an everyday basis, and less showpieces. And Kozlo's was a good old name in Texas. They had the oldest name in the business down there. They had an established clientele, and we started building up our service business. And that's the other part that started dropping off. People decided they weren't going to service their furs. They weren't going to remodel them. They weren't going to even store them or pay to have them cleaned. And that's when I started seeing declines, because when it was in the height of the season, people would bring armloads in, and they were just like, yeah, I'm bringing all these things in for storage and cleaning and all this kind of stuff. And then that started to drop off. So, and we still had good sales. We had one gal, Laura, who was very connected with the Hispanic community in San Antonio. And she helped me run the sales down on the border and Laredo and all. And we'd get Mexican nationals coming right over the border and buying very expensive stuff. So that really kept our business alive down there. And it was kind of an intricate very different way of doing business because all the others were in the larger cities and they were relying on larger clientele. And we were boosting our business by going international.
Tell me also, because this has come up a couple of times over the course of our relationship, your connection to the fur industry and how you know about it and et cetera, et cetera. You've told me a couple of times, but let's hear it on tape.
Oh, and I preface this by saying I have never worked for 1 minute in the fur industry, and I, have always been to the side. Let me get this straight. My father's mother, my grandmother, is named Bertha Schumacher, and Bertha Schumacher was the daughter of the owner of Schumacher Furs. And I can't remember if her dad, my great grandfather, was the founder or not, but there was Louis. No, let me get straight. I think Carl Sr. was her dad, and his dad, Louis, was the founder. And Louis was one of these guys, these robust men of the 1800s who lit out to Oregon and started this fur thing where he'd cruise up to Alaska in the summer and do his trapping and stuff, and then come back to Oregon with the furs and knock up his wife and then split back for Alaska as soon as the weather permitted and get back to his real business. And, he might have spent 3 or 4 months of the year in Oregon banging the old lady and selling the furs and stuff. But I think all his real action was in Alaska, because that's where all his time went. But anyhow, so my cousins owned and operated Schumacher Furs. My part of the family didn't really have anything to do with it. We were invited to their parties. I learned to swim at their pools and that sort of stuff.
That's funny. But they were, without question, the lead independent furrier in Portland.
They were Oregon's oldest established furrier. I think they went back to 1849, and or somewhere thereabout. And certainly in the Northwest, they were a landmark. They were not just a retailer; they were also a manufacturer. They did, of course, repairs and maintenance, and storage and cleaning, and all that kind of stuff. And had a lovely landmark building downtown on. Caddy corner from the Galleria, kind of by 10th and Yam Hill for Portlanders.
Right area.
We would each spring watch the Rose Parade from the second floor at Schumacher Furs, standing basically next to the cutting tables. It'd move the cutting tables aside and put some snacks on them, and then we'd wave at the parade. Rose Festival. It's a big deal in Portland.
Hope you don't get a few Blue Fox in between your teeth with your snacks.
Yeah, it was a nice thing, a family business.
That's cool.
And all of the people who worked there had been there, for decades. I mean,
how long did they go for? Do you know? How do I feel about it today? Looking back on those days? Well, it's coming up on 30 years ago, and it still seems like yesterday. It was truly the best of times and the worst of times. So, in 1929, the year the market crashed, my great uncles started one fur store that they grew into many, becoming the largest retail specialty outerwear company in the U.S. They brought my grandfather in shortly after he married their sister, and he brought my father in for a short time before my parents divorced. It was kind of predetermined for me. I think the one thing that sticks out for me, different from all the other legacy employees I worked with there, who were following in their parents' or grandparents' footsteps as well, is that my family, lives were lost because of the stress of it all, because of our connection to this. We were just a group of wannabe business people growing up with hope in an industry that was about to smack us down before we could get there. So, combined with my own personal regrets, that's what lingers for me. Beginning in the early 80s, there was a pending sense of doom. A desperation settled in over every move we made, every conversation we had. In our hearts, I think many of us now, we'd admit that we felt it coming. And for me at least, No amount of fun, alcohol, or drugs could mask what was going on, and there was plenty of it all. It challenged the human spirit day in and day out, and was unlike anything I'd seen before or have seen since. I don't know if I'd say we flew too close to the sun, because if that was the case, we would have burnt up a lot sooner. We pulled every gimmick we had out of the playbook to try and reverse course. From sales to celebrities, none of it worked. Our plane was in an irreversible tailspin. The first time, it was just a handful of protesters outside on Black Friday, but you felt protected by the physical barrier of the store itself. By the time they were chaining themselves to the racks and handcuffing themselves to the fixtures, we knew we were sunk. Our passion for what we did paled in comparison to their commitment to their cause. Lessons learned? Well, we all now know that when you get to the top of the highest peak, there's only one direction that you can go.
And lastly, on the biz side, you've heard us mention in many of the podcasts talking about the computer system and the electronic data systems space and almost a full floor that was devoted to our server rooms and our EDS computer people. Evans was one of the first companies in retail to have such a system connecting all 100 plus of its stores around the country. And for a company much smaller than the department stores with which we were leasing space in some cases we were far ahead of them technologically. So here's Jennifer Meltzer recounting the early days of the incorporation of the computer system into the Evans Fur Company.
Oh, one of the things that Bob was radically working on with the company was it wasn't computerized. He was trying so hard to computerize everything that Evans did, because we were a dinosaur. I mean, we had to like rev up the computerization, which again, look where we are now with all this. And it was very challenging and very hard, and it cost a lot of money. And unfortunately, that never really happened.
We did these tremendous warehouse sales and fur sales in fancy hotel ballrooms. In LA, it was in the ballroom at the Beverly Hilton Hotel right next to the Robinson store, where they do the Golden Globes every year. I think they still do them there to this day, or were doing so up until recently. And we would clean out all the fur salons in the region. Sometimes the company would send in merchandise from outside of the region, and we would basically set up store in these ballrooms, in these warehouses. In Chicago, it was at the boat show at McCormick Place every year. And we were tremendous amounts of business we would do. $1 million in 2.5 days of sales, sometimes more. $1.25 million, I think, was the high in LA that we got up to. This was Evans at its best on display right before everything went to hell. Huge sales. The thing was made a show of. The combination of A.L. Meltzer's legacy and David Meltzer's expansion and charm offensive, that bled over into the customers. And then again, when you combine it with things like bringing the prices down so almost everybody could afford it, 50% off, 75% off so-called original and regular prices. And then you got into, which the auto companies are still doing today, the 0% financing game. I mean, it really cheapened everything, but boy, did we do a lot of business at those events. And it was a tremendous amount of work for all of us in those regions to clear out the stores, get them on the merchandise on a truck and the racks and the signage and everything, the stanchions, everything you would need, and get it to the location, set up your temporary store for what was literally 72 hours or less, and then do the reverse and get it all set up back in the stores so that by Monday or Tuesday you were back in business in all those locations. An amazing set of events.
When I look back and I look at those early, big sales we had, where we would do couple 100,000 sometimes on the weekend. We didn't do 1 million, but we would do pretty good, right? It was kind of exciting, right? The prices were marked down. Everybody was it was super busy, right? But again, towards the end, it was like, you guys are always on sale.
Yep.
Like, it didn't feel like there was as much excitement, and there weren't that many people coming in like it used to be. It was like when you had 1 or 2 customers, we were all over. I'll start off by saying hello, Craig, because I know you're listening to this. I really hope that you come on and have a little conversation with us. Craig was the best, and still the best. Still talk to him, not as much as I'd like, but we try to, we're trying to get together now. Thanks to you, because I've been trying to coach him to come on here.
Nice, awesome.
Craig was a hands-on guy, just like Larry, just like all the executives who made, like, everybody really understood the business and came from the beginning of, being in the vault boy or whatever. And that, you don't see that in businesses today, and I think Craig was excellent at really motivating people. And while he was very friendly, he was your friend, and he wanted to be out in the stores. He wanted the action. But he was get the job done. He knew how to execute. And I can remember before, we would plan the years out, we would have a great time. We would spend 2 days sitting in a room, running through all the advertising we want to do, all the promotions. And he was always open to new ideas, right? Like, oh, we're going to do, the January, New Year's Day sale. We got to do this sale. We got to do that sale. Robinson's did a great sale. We should do that. But it was always, what else do you guys think? What's interesting? What can you do? And he let us do some really cool stuff. Again, that you don't find that in big companies, right? So while we followed a marketing advertising plan, we were still able to kind of put our 2 cents in and make it happen. That was, again, part of that training. That was great. And that, I think a lot of that was Craig. I'm not sure all the regional VPs were like that.
No, so I worked with McGrath, and he wasn't like that at all.
The strength of a family, like the strength of an army, lies in its loyalty to each other. Mario Puzo. In every conceivable manner, the family is a link to our past, bridge to our future. Alex Haley. In 1912, Julius Meltzer left Belarus to join his brothers in Philadelphia. It wasn't long before he summoned his wife Rose and their 4 children, which would soon grow to 6, to join him. By 1929, with their mother Rose retired to bed to stay, the oldest daughter, Thelma, was sent to finishing school to learn to help care for the family. 2 of the boys were on their way to star law careers, and the other 2, led by A.L. Meltzer, who later brought in brother Herman, were building what would become the first Furrier in America to become a public company before falling prey to time and generational shifts. Because tragedy, both personally and professionally, was lying in wait and checking in for an extended stay. Decades. And the Meltzers, beginning in 1936, would never be the same again. The tragedy train stayed in the station, even though very prosperous times for the remaining siblings were afoot. But money doesn't care who has it, and the Meltzer clan would be struck down again 30 years later, and then again almost 30 years after that. 2 of the children and a great-grandchild of Rose and Julius Meltzer were victims of suicide. Coincidence? Epigenetics? Generational tyranny? Will we ever know? However, a deep sense of sharing existed between surviving siblings, the bond deeper than the average set of sibling relationships, formed under tremendously difficult upbringings, all of which led to various children, grandchildren, nieces, and nephews all joining Evans Furs at one time or another, including myself, where I began as a stock boy in 1975 and worked in various locations around the country for the company until 1995.
Don't worry, you didn't miss it.
So now shifting gears and looking at people talking about people. Remember, one of the great things I think about this story and everything that's coming out of these podcasts, as well as the 3 films, are these themes of people versus people versus themselves, and people versus the environment, all the things that make for great drama and great stories. So let me start with a few clips going back to the old days of Evans Furs and a couple of my cousins talking about the founder of the company, A.L. Meltzer.
You know what? I mean, he was my grandfather, and I remember he was kind to me. He brought me, he traveled, and he would bring me dolls from all the countries he visited. So I still have a collection of dolls from all over the world, actually. And he took us out for dinner, and we went to to his club and dinner, and just I have good memories of him. Nothing very specific, just he came to the house a lot for dinner. He used to fall asleep right after dinner. Like literally at the table, we'd be cleaning up and he'd take a nap. And it was great. But he passed away what year did he pass away? 72? 70. So I was 9. So, I didn't have a lot of, long-term memories of him. He was in and out, saw him a lot on Sundays. I remember his wedding to Lottie. So I remember his first apartment the apartment I remember in the city. He had, in the dining room, he had red velvet paisley, wallpaper that I thought was very cool because it was very tactile, you could touch it. And Minerva would be like, "Don't touch the wallpaper." I'm like, okay. And then, I remember A.L. being just a lovely, kind man.
I used to go to dance class on Saturday morning. And after dance class, I would shower and change it there. And then I would walk over to Evans. And my father always had paid off the police officer on the street corner at Adams and Wabash. And he would cross me. And then I would walk down to State Street and go over to Monroe. And the policeman there was waiting for me. And he would take my hand and cross me across State Street. And I'd walk into the store. And at that time, it was only the 3rd floor and the 5th floor. And I would go up to my father's office, and my mother would most of the time join us, and we'd go out for lunch. It just was always there for me. When it expanded to the 4th floor, and then when it went down to the 1st floor and the 12th floor, it was a natural progression in my head. It was expanding. My father was doing a wonderful job. He was off to Europe. He and my mother went to Paris. They went to Milan. They bought. They got Bill Blass and all the different designers to design for them. It just was the progression of what a business should be.
I asked for a raise, and they said no, so I quit. And then I went to Rosenthal, and I was there for about a month. And Jimmy Lietz called me, and it said, "Why did you leave?" I said, "I wanted more money." So, of course, Paraga put him up to that. And then the next day I was back at Evans again with more money than I had asked for in the first place. But still they didn't pay enough. Yeah.
But that story, I love, it just tells you the lengths that you would have to go to and the lengths that they were willing to go to also.
Exactly.
So they also thought like things like the party every year at the Drury Lane or wherever it was, that was, shit like that would suffice, or the turkey thing. But at the end of the day, people just wanted to be paid.
Turkey is $10.
The Evans Fur Company, especially at the time I worked there between the late 70s and the mid to late 90s, was truly a melting pot. People from all walks of life, people of different colors, different religions, different sexual orientations, different cultural outlooks, different socioeconomic backgrounds. The list goes on and on and on. Like I said, truly a melting pot. And we all learn to come together, work together for a common cause. But one of the things that comes out in some of these comments as we go back and talk to people years later and look at the different microcosms that many of us lived in and the views that our world might have had, which would have been different than the views of the micro world that one of our colleagues might have had. Case in point, one of my favorite people in the company, who you've seen me recount my story with her and Mr. T in the past, Diane Jones.
Salons was different. And I'm going to tell you something. One day, I came to Mr. Marks, and I said, you know what? Me and my dad going down to Jewtown. He said, Jewtown? I said, yeah. He said, what's Jewtown? I said, we're going down to Jewtown. We're going shopping. So he said, never say that again. That's what he told me, to my face. He said, never say that again. I said, why? He said, when you go down, wherever you call it Jewtown, you go down there and you look up on the sign and see what the signs say. And then you come back and tell me. So I went home and I told my dad. I said, you know what? My boss just told me there ain't no such thing. Don't say Jewtown at the store anymore. And my dad said, what the hell is wrong with you? What the hell is wrong with him? That's what everybody called it, Jewtown. I said, well, he told me I'm not allowed to say Jewtown no more. He told me to look up on the sign and see what it say. So we went down there. And I looked up on the sign, and it said Maxwell Street. So I said, okay. So I came back, and I said, Mr. Marks. He said, what? I say, so I went down on Maxwell Street. He said, that's what you call it from now on out.
One time they sent me out. I was there during the first strike. So I'm going to F1 to pick up a couple of green coats. Well, I'm walking in, I have my suit on, and there's these ladies spitting at me and throwing their coffee. And so I went up, picked up the coats, and I'm like, you need to give me a couple of garbage bags. So I wrapped both, I put 2 bags on the fur coats, and then I put a bag on myself. And I'm walking out with this plastic bag on, and people looked at me like, oh. I get back to the office and they're like, what the hell happened to you? I'm like, there's a first strike going on and I know why you guys didn't want to go now.
Right, exactly.
So unfortunately after that, anytime that we knew there was an issue, they would send me to go and walk through the line. But doing that was great. It was a fun time. They put me up opposite Madison Square Garden on 7th and 28th.
We got a dog for the first time ever. My mom agreed to let us have a dog. And we got the dog because some woman who was a breeder came in and wanted a mink belt. And Jerry said, okay, you trade the mink belt for the puppy. That's how we got our dog. Everything was linked to Evans. There was nothing that wasn't. There was a woman that came in whose family was wealthy and she was the sole heir to their fortune. They died in a plane crash. And she had all of their antiques. And Jerry was a big antique guy. And the woman came in, because I guess, was she trying to sell the coats? Yeah, she came in. And Jerry and my dad, I remember going to her apartment. Her name was Joanne. Right? And we went to her apartment. She had all this fabulous stuff. And they bought all this stuff from her. There's so much in my life connected to Evans. It's crazy.
A large part of A.L. Meltzer's strategy for expanding Evans Furs in the 1950s involved putting Evans Furs concessions or leased departments in some of the finest department stores around the country, just as commerce in the nation was shifting outward from city downtowns to the growing suburbs. The boom was apparently on when brother-in-law Harold Sussman, husband of sister Thelma Meltzer, was sent to Boston to expand the operation in a move that would foretell much of the growth legacy of Evans Furs for the next 50 years. In taking family from the corporate and family headquarters and relocating them, A.O. Meltzer was signaling how important this strategy was. The concept of having a concession in a department store allowed Evans Furs to have a physical footprint in key targeted cities without the overhead expense, all while allowing Evans to take advantage of the foot traffic brought in by the local host store.
They called me in the office and they had to call corporate Evans and they said, who's this guy? Jeff Becker's like telling us that we have to give him space in our store.
The relationships were often complicated, but at the end of the day, were driven by numbers and money. Field general managers, of which I, myself, was one, in both San Francisco and Los Angeles, had to juggle serving two masters, keeping both corporate management at Evans and at the host store happy enough to keep both Evans and you, the general manager, continuing on there.
They helped us, they got us, the space we need in these stores. And we were doing business, so they loved that. It helped them get to their store numbers.
However, in the long run, time was not on Evans' side as a seismic shift changed consumer sentiment towards fur, and when combined with the industry destroying the luxury product positioning that took it decades to build, it was no longer aspirational when furs began mass assembly line production and were made affordable to everyone. Prior to that, though, the strategy, which would be continued by future CEOs David Meltzer, son of the founder, and Robert Meltzer, grandson of the founder, helped Evans grow into greater than a 100-location powerhouse, bringing in annual revenue of over $150 million. That is, until rapidly declining sales forced the bottom to drop out, and Evans would begin a multi-year decline, culminating in its shutdown and asset sale in 1999, 70 years after A.L. Meltzer founded the business.
We loved what we did, and we wanted to go out and, make things happen.
Not the only language story in the bunch amongst our people versus people and people versus themselves and people versus the environment situations. Here's one that's kind of all three rolled into one. Sharon Bass talking about the complexities back then of buying furs in the Far East as the business was growing and growing, and we were ordering millions and millions and millions of more, and we were looking to figure out how to squeeze every penny out of the cost that we could, while they were trying to figure out how to pad on every penny of cost that they could in profit into the deal, and it required extreme measures, including made-up language.
They were very, very smart when we'd start going out to these vendors. And I got to tell you, Evans coming was like, it was like the Evans was doing, I believe, in Korea, we were doing $30 million at cost at that point. That was a lot of business to these guys. I mean, major. And so we'd get on these buses. There was usually a small group of 10 or 12 of us. And we'd get on the bus. We would arrive at these vendors. And I'm telling you, it was the King of England arriving. Oh, the Evans group is here. And they'd have a whole bunch of people, like 30 people waiting outside, bowing to us. I'm not exaggerating, bowing to us. And we'd get in, what can we get you to drink? What can we get you to eat? But then we'd start working with them. And Robert didn't do any of the talking. David didn't do the talking. The only person that was allowed to converse with them, and you were told this, I was told this, not knowing. You can ask questions and pass notes to Barry, but Barry does all the talking. He's the only person that talks to them. But then what you could do, and what they did do, is they talked between Barry and the rest of the Evans group. they talked rapid Pig Latin. Now, I could speak decent Pig Latin. This was a whole foreign language they were talking because they didn't want the vendors to know what they were saying. So number one, they're speaking Pig Latin. Number two, they're using the codes, the vendor codes. Well, I don't know the vendor's codes at that point. I mean, to them, it's just the vendor codes. They know every. And thirdly, then they have a code for the price. You know, every number has, if it's 1, it's a 3. If it's 2, it's a 5. So if the cost was 135, they would say it's 252. But what was it at vendor W10? Well, at W10, it was, 342. And I'm thinking, what the hell are they talking about? And again, they're talking it in Pig Latin. And they're melting your eyeballs with their garlic breath. I mean, I'm telling you, I'm like, I can't do this. I cannot do this. I would come home with such a splitting headache. And then, you can't eat anything there because it's really horrible food. At least in those years, it was horrible food. So, the only thing you could eat was, they do have wonderful apples. So you'd get a baked apple and maybe you'd get some spaghetti or something. That's all you could eat there. It was just, but I'm telling you, between the codes for the prices, the codes for the vendors, and the Pig Latin, I'm like, what in the hell are they talking about? I had no idea what they were talking about. None.
I'll go first. I looked at Evans, and I still do, connecting with people. I am grateful to be doing this right now and that you are doing this to connect the people together. It was a weird circumstance how we found you. I was screwing around on YouTube, and I think I put in fur or something, and Skin on Skin came up, and I thought, what's that? And then I saw Scott Hunt. I poked around and saw Scott Hunter. I said, I know that guy. So anyway, that's how that happened. But I look back at Evans as, number one, it's how in the foundation of my life, how I live my life, but taught me so much about a bigger world than the world that I grew up in. And I think that is something I will always cherish.
Going back to Diane Jones, she recounts the time that Mark Posternack, who was the longtime third-floor fur manager at the main Evans Fur Salon after the retirement of Saul Marks, Mark Posternack's IVF and pregnancy, his wife's pregnancy, and their birth journey together with his wife, Linda. And you better grab a tissue for this one, because you may end up in tears like the rest of us did on that day.
I think with Mark Posternack, he couldn't have kids either at one point in time. His wife called me one day because Mark Posternack was real nosy. He was in everybody's fucking business. Everybody's fucking business. And so she called me. She said, Diane, I need you to do something for me. I said, what? They had the baby they was gonna adopt was approved. They was getting ready to adopt the baby, and it was ready to go. And she said, I want to tell you I'm pregnant. I said, you what? She said, I'm pregnant. And I said, okay. So she said, I need for you to get the whole 3rd floor in the back with a conference room in and sit them down. And I'm going to send a mascot in there and tell Mark. Everybody was in. Mr. Mark said, what the hell is going on? I said, please, Mr. Mark, would you just let everybody go in the back? I said, because I need to tell you guys something. I didn't tell Mr. Mark what it was going to be. I just need to tell you something. And he agreed to do it. And I forget whatever he was dressed up like, but it wasn't all that. But when she came in there, he turned over and looked at Mark, and he said, Mark, you're getting ready to be a father, and not an adopted father. Your wife is pregnant. And that dude started crying, and he had all of us in there boo-hooing.
Were you lured, Evans, when you met Pat Murphy, and then a little bit about working for her and with her, and then into your lifelong relationship?
Oh, absolutely. Pat Murphy, she stood up at our wedding anyway, but I met her on the 3rd floor when I was in the training program. And for whatever reason, both of us have similar personality types and Irish humor. I would use it, Irish humor. And so we got along very, very well. And she didn't particularly like trainees all that well, or tolerate them. And she had quite an attitude, and she loved to intimidate people to a point. And I just am not a person that can be easily intimidated. And so for whatever reason, we just formed a bond. And we had our fathers, we were raised similar ways. It was just a lot in common. And and so on we went. I don't know. One thing led to another, and 38 years later, I talked to her every day. I mean, that close of a friend, and we didn't live in the same city. We visited one another over the years. So I don't know. That was a foundation that we made at Evans. We just hit it off first thing.
For 42 years, I have been living with something that it turned out, I thought that, well, let me just throw it out there. So when I was getting ready to marry Sylvia, Pat says to me, "It's never going to last." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" She goes, you're not the same, and it's never going to last. And I said, "I'll show you." And, after a couple of years, I wasn't really sure yet. I wasn't that cocky about it. But as time went on, maybe 10 years, I used to, on my anniversary every year, I would make a toast to Pat. And I would say, "Pat, you were wrong. You were wrong." And I drink my shot. Well, after 41 years, I wanted to, I was a little bit too late.
Yeah.
But I wanted to get there and say, "Pat, I'm sorry. You were right."
The combination of changes in the economy, changes in social mores, changes basically in our culture, really put a damper on the entire fur industry. Evans was hardly the only family-owned and operated multi-store chain across the country during the 1950s and 60s. Relationships like those had between Evans Furs and Sakowitz department stores of Houston, Texas, specifically showed the power of combining multiple powerhouses into something that, for Evans Furs, brought it into the luxurious southwest territory of Sakowitz.
The French have a great expression, on cherche le créneau, look for the crack, and then drive a wedge in it.
Sakowitz, which, based in Texas and with its own long family history, was one of the major moves made by David Meltzer, son of the founder A.L. Meltzer, when he became CEO of Evans Furs, because acquiring the lease to run the fur salons in Sakowitz was special, because in the golden age of retail, Sakowitz was more than just a store.
My grandfather and great uncle moved up to Houston and expanded with Houston as Houston grew.
In 1949, it was growing so much and Houston was growing so much, they wanted to really build a wonderful new store. If there was one thing Robert Sakowitz learned during his European education, was the benefit of having concessions or leased departments.
If you go to Europe, even today with China,
most of the stores
would lease out space. It was just a vertical mall, giving them the equivalent of stores within a store.
Armed with a partnership that would give Evans Furs valuable entree into the oil-rich Southwest while giving Sakowitz a luxury outerwear fur department in great demand, both companies flourished and continued onward with their plans for growth.
And we had a very nice business in Houston because people traveled, and they knew that a good fur coat was a great symbol of success.
Capitalizing on ways to expand their businesses in tandem, both companies looked to the internet of yesteryear, the mail-order catalog business.
And the golden age of catalogs was in this period
roughly 1970 to 1990, 95. The Sakowitz holiday catalog rivaled even that of more well-known Neiman Marcus, and Evans Furs provided Robert Sakowitz with the juice to make a serious holiday statement. And I said to David, what's the most expensive fur in the world that would be totally unique? And he said, clearly, Robert, it's a Russian Crown Borgazine sable. Further showcasing the teamwork the two businesses displayed together, the quick-thinking Sakowitz came up with a solution that David Meltzer and Evans Furs could afford to support. Said, okay, what if I can pre-sell it beforehand? Said, you get it pre-sold, we're going to Leningrad together. We went through and we'd go through and grade, and I learned more about the fur business in those 3 days than anybody ever could. And as my grandfather, who also worked for Evans Furs for over 50 years, used to tell me, good times don't last, but good people do. And by the 1980s, the fur business was caught between numerous paradigm shifts from which it would not recover. In the fur business, PETA had a lot to do with it. The fur business began to drop off in our part of the world when the economy shifted. Along came other aspects of this. The country became overmauled. Internet came along. But prior to that, Evans Furs and Sakowitz department stores enjoyed tremendous success in partnership together, with both companies growing to over $150 million in sales revenue. We boomed in the 70s. All of the oil-producing states. People had a lot of money. They bought furs. They bought couture. That was the era, I would say, the golden era of department stores and specialty stores.
So until I see you again next time, folks, I want to thank you for joining me again today on another episode of the Companion Podcast in support of the film Skin on Skin, The Rise and Fall of the World's Largest Furrier, Part 2. Until I see you again next time, have a great day.
On the next episode of the Companion Podcast in support of the film Skin on Skin, The Rise and Fall of the World's Largest Furrier, Part 2.
We're calling it L.A. Confidentially.
I was the contemporary bar. I just thought Los Angeles, palm trees. And the next thing I know, I was given an airline ticket. Patty Kay called. Or who would call with the airline tickets?
Patty Kay?
Right, it was Patty Kay. She said, okay, I'm sending down tickets for you to go, and you're staying at the Hyatt Regency Hotel. You're going to go look for an apartment.
All right, so all of the guys are standing around, as you can very well imagine.
So I guess by the time you got there,
it was the largest. It was the largest division in the company outside of Chicago. By the time I got there,
I was on the road a lot, and I know that differed from what Larry and you may have done.
On the next episode of the Companion Podcast in support of the film Skin on Skin, The Rise and Fall of the World's Largest Furrier, Part 2.